The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a golden light over the neatly arranged table. Claire stood by the counter, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She always loved this time of day, the peaceful moments before the world woke up. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and she smiled, thinking of Peter, her husband of 8 years. He'd be down any minute, wearing that sleepy grin she adored. Everything felt right. Their marriage was, by all accounts, perfect. They had built a comfortable life together in their cozy suburban home, the kind of life people admired from the outside. Even in the midst of the long period of isolation, they managed to maintain a sense of normalcy. Working from home had allowed them to spend more time together, and Claire often thought about how lucky they were to have each other through it all. The clatter of footsteps broke her thoughts. Peter appeared in the doorway, tousled hair and still in his pajamas. He walked over and kissed her on the forehead. "Morning," he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. His touch was familiar, comforting, just as it always had been. Claire leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. Everything felt so easy, so safe. "Coffee's ready," she said, handing him a cup. He thanked her and sat down at the table, glancing at his phone. Claire noticed the slight frown on his face as he scrolled through messages. It wasn't like him to bring work into breakfast, especially now that they had more time for each other. She pushed the thought aside, brushing it off as nothing. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes after years of being together. Claire enjoyed these quiet moments, where words weren't necessary to express their closeness. She caught Peter's eye, and he smiled, but something seemed off. It was a fleeting feeling, one she couldn't quite place. His gaze lingered on his phone again, just for a second too long before he tucked it away in his pocket. As he stood up to clear the table, Claire felt a strange unease in her chest. She shook her head slightly. She was being paranoid. Peter had always been attentive and loving, and they had never had any real issues. This was just a phase, she told herself. Everyone was stressed during these strange times. She watched him disappear into his office, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Alone in the kitchen, Claire sat back in her chair, staring at the now empty table. She tried to push the feeling of doubt away. Peter was a good husband. They had everything they needed: love, trust, a beautiful life together. Still, a small voice inside her wondered, why did things feel different? That night, as Claire lay in bed, her mind wouldn't rest. Peter was in his study, working late again, the soft glow of his computer screen visible through the barely cracked door. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day in her head. Something still felt off. She had tried to convince herself that Peter's distractions were just stress, but there was a gnawing feeling in her gut she couldn't ignore. Unable to sleep, she got up and wandered down the hallway, her steps soft on the carpet. Passing by his office, she noticed the door was open wider now. The light from his laptop flickered, and Peter was nowhere in sight. Probably downstairs, grabbing a late-night snack, she thought. Claire paused at the door, her eyes drawn to the screen. It was a habit, she realized, checking his messages, his emails, not because she distrusted him, but because she wanted to feel connected to what was occupying his mind. She felt silly for being so curious, but her hand moved almost on its own as she stepped into the room. Peter's inbox was open, and her heart sank as soon as she saw it. A name appeared repeatedly: Sophie. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly. With a deep breath, she clicked on the messages, unsure of what she would find, but knowing deep down that it wasn't good. The messages were friendly at first, banter, jokes, and talk about books and movies. But as she scrolled further, the tone shifted. Their conversations became deeper, more personal. Peter had shared things with Sophie that he never told Claire. His frustrations, his feelings of isolation, and a vague sense of not knowing who he truly was. Claire's stomach twisted as she read on. "I feel like I've been pretending for so long, like I'm not really myself, but I don't know who I'm supposed to be. Do you ever feel like that?" Sophie's response was kind, supportive. "It's normal to feel lost sometimes. Maybe you need to explore those feelings. See where they take you. Don't be afraid to dig deeper." Claire's eyes widened, and her heart pounded in her chest. The words echoed in her mind. Peter had never shared anything like this with her. It wasn't an affair in the physical sense, but the emotional connection was undeniable. He had turned to someone else for comfort, for understanding, and that cut deeper than anything. She sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop. The man she thought she knew, her husband, her Peter, was slipping away into someone else's world. A world where she didn't exist. The house was silent, except for the faint sound of Peter moving around downstairs. Claire's heart felt heavy with the weight of what she had just uncovered. The perfect life they had built, the trust she had in him. It all felt like it was crumbling before her eyes. She had to confront him, but as she stood in the quiet darkness of their home, the thought of that conversation filled her with dread. What would she say? What would he say? And worse, what if she wasn't ready for the answers? The next morning, Claire couldn't hide her turmoil any longer. Her thoughts swirled with the words she had read, the secrets Peter had shared with Sophie. She moved through her morning routine on autopilot, her mind racing with questions, fears, and doubts. She barely noticed Peter as he came into the kitchen for breakfast, but the moment she looked up at him, the tension between them was palpable. Peter poured his coffee, his movements calm, as though everything was perfectly normal. But Claire's hands shook as she placed her cup down, the sound louder than usual in the otherwise quiet room. She couldn't wait any longer. "Peter," she said, her voice wavering. "Who's Sophie?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Peter froze, his back turned to her, his hand gripping the edge of the counter. He didn't respond at first, and Claire could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he exhaled slowly as if bracing himself. When he finally turned around, his expression was unreadable. "What do you mean?" His voice was careful, but Claire could hear the uncertainty creeping in. "I saw the messages," she said, her voice firmer now. "Last night, I saw everything." Peter's face drained of color. He set his coffee down, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "There was none." "It's not what you think, Claire," he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "It's just online. We've never even met in person." Claire's throat tightened, her anger and hurt rising to the surface. "That's supposed to make it better? You've been talking to her for months, Peter. You've been sharing things with her that you never shared with me. Why? Why didn't you come to me?" Peter's gaze fell to the floor. He seemed smaller now, as if the weight of his secret had finally broken him down. "I don't know," he whispered. I felt disconnected. From everything. From you." And Sophie, she listened. She didn't judge me. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Claire stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected anger, but all she felt now was an overwhelming sadness. "Disconnected? For me?" Peter looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't even know how to admit it to myself." The room seemed to shrink around them, the distance between them vast and cold. Claire wanted to scream, to make him feel the pain he had caused her. But all she could do was sit there, numb, as the reality of their broken connection settled in. The days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Peter had promised to cut off contact with Sophie, but Claire's trust had been shattered. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was still being hidden from her, that Peter wasn't telling her the whole truth. Each time she looked at him, her mind returned to those messages, to the confessions he had made to Sophie that he had never shared with her. One night, after Peter had gone to bed, Claire found herself sitting in the living room, staring at his closed laptop on the coffee table. Her fingers itched to open it again, to dig deeper into the conversations she hadn't fully read. She knew it wasn't healthy, but the pull was too strong to resist. She needed answers. She needed to understand what had driven her husband to seek comfort in someone else. She opened the laptop and scrolled through the old messages. She didn't know what she was looking for, perhaps a clue, a reason that would explain everything. As she read on, the messages became more troubling. Peter hadn't just been confiding in Sophie about his feelings of disconnection. He had been talking about his past, his childhood, and parts of himself that Claire had never heard him mention before. One message, in particular, caught her eye. "There's a part of me I've never talked about. Not with Claire, not with anyone. Sometimes I feel like I don't even know who I really am. I've spent my whole life trying to ignore it, but I can't anymore." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the words, her mind reeling. Who was this person Peter was talking about? And why had he never shared this with her? As she continued to read, it became clear that Sophie had unknowingly helped Peter confront something deeply buried in his past. Their conversations were no longer just about escaping the present. They were about exploring a part of himself that he had long kept hidden. Claire felt a surge of anger and confusion. Why hadn't he come to her with this? Why did he feel the need to open up to a stranger about something so personal? The pain of his emotional betrayal cut even deeper now, but so did her sense of curiosity. She wanted to know what Peter was hiding, but more than that, she wanted to know why he had kept it from her. With trembling hands, Claire closed the laptop. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding this conversation. The truth, whatever it was, had to come out. Claire had waited long enough. The tension between her and Peter had become unbearable, a constant weight pressing down on their every interaction. The unanswered questions gnawed at her, and each passing day felt like another step away from the man she thought she knew. She needed answers, and she wasn't willing to let Peter hide behind vague excuses any longer. That evening, after dinner, Claire sat at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of her chair. Peter was cleaning up, moving slowly, as if delaying the inevitable. She took a deep breath, bracing herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. "Peter," she began, her voice steady but laced with the determination she had been building up for days. "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. I know there's more to this than what you've said." Peter froze for a moment, the sound of water running from the sink filling the silence. He turned off the faucet and wiped his hands on a towel, his back still turned to her. Claire could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his posture seemed to collapse under the weight of what he was about to say. Slowly, he turned to face her, his expression serious, but his eyes were filled with something else. Fear, perhaps. "Regret. You're right," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is more. I've been avoiding it because I didn't know how to explain it. I still don't." Claire's heart pounded as she leaned forward. "Then try. Please, Peter. I can't take this anymore." Peter sat down across from her, running a hand through his hair, the exhaustion clear on his face. "It's not about Sophie," he began, his voice strained. "At least, not in the way you think. She didn't mean anything to me, not like that. But talking to her, it reminded me of something I've been running from for a long time. Something I've never told you." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had been expecting this, but hearing him say it felt like a punch to the chest. "What do you mean?" Peter looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting as he tried to find the right words. "I wasn't honest with you about my past, about who I am, or where I come from." The room seemed to close in around them as Claire's mind raced. "Your past," she echoed. "What are you talking about?" Peter sighed, his gaze finally meeting hers. "I'm adopted, Claire. My parents, the people I thought were my parents, they weren't. I found out when I was a teenager, but I never told anyone. Not even you." Claire blinked, the words sinking in slowly. "You're adopted? Why didn't you tell me?" Peter shook his head. "I don't know. I thought I could just bury it, pretend it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. And now it's all coming back, and I don't know how to deal with it. I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing, like I didn't belong anywhere. And talking to Sophie, she made me confront that. She made me realize I've been living a lie." Claire sat in stunned silence, her heart aching for him, but also for the life they had built on what now felt like a fragile foundation. "Why didn't you come to me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Peter's eyes filled with guilt. "Because I was scared that you wouldn't understand, that you'd see me differently." The room felt heavy with the weight of his confession, and for the first time, Claire realized that Peter's betrayal wasn't just about Sophie. It was about the person he had been hiding from her, and from himself, all these years. Peter's confession left Claire feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her. Everything she had believed about their life together, about the man she had loved for so many years, was suddenly clouded by this revelation. She stared at him, searching for the words, but nothing came. The silence between them stretched, heavy with the weight of his past, now laid bare before her. Finally, Peter continued, his voice shaky. I found out by accident when I was a teenager. My parents were arguing about something, and I overheard them mention it, my adoption. They never told me. I wasn't supposed to know. Claire felt a pang of sorrow for him. The idea of discovering something so monumental by accident must have been devastating. Why didn't you confront them? Why didn't you ask? Peter shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. I was too afraid. I didn't want to know more. I thought if I ignored it, I could just keep living the way I was. But it was always there in the back of my mind, this nagging feeling that I didn't really belong. He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the table. When I met you, I thought I could bury it for good. You made me feel like I finally had a place, like I could be someone without that shadow hanging over me. But lately, I felt it creeping back. And with the long period of isolation, the separation from everyone, I started questioning everything again. Who I am, where I come from. Claire's heart ached at the pain in his voice. Peter, why didn't you tell me sooner? I'm your wife. I would have understood. Peter looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. I didn't want to burden you with my doubts. You deserve someone who's sure of themselves, someone who knows who they are. I've never been that person, and I was scared you'd see me differently. Claire shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. You didn't have to carry this alone. Peter reached out, his hand brushing hers gently. I know. I see that now. But Sophie, she made me realize I couldn't keep running from it. She didn't judge me. She just listened. Claire swallowed hard, her mind racing. Peter's connection with Sophie wasn't about love or betrayal. It was about him finding a way to confront a part of himself he had been too afraid to face. But even knowing that didn't make the pain go away. In the days following Peter's revelation, Claire found herself caught between two conflicting emotions, compassion and hurt. She now understood why Peter had turned to Sophie, why he had been so distant. But that didn't erase the sense of betrayal she felt, the sting of being kept in the dark for so long. Her mind wrestled with the reality that Peter's emotional journey had been happening in secret without her. She sat alone in their bedroom one evening, staring at the reflection of herself in the mirror. How had they ended up here? Their life, which once seemed so perfect, was now full of cracks, the weight of Peter's hidden past threatening to break them apart. When Peter entered the room, he sat beside her, his face full of exhaustion and uncertainty. I don't know where to go from here, he admitted quietly. But I don't want to lose you, Claire. I need you with me while I figure this out. Claire looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. She loved him, of that she was sure. But the trust between them had been fractured, and she wasn't certain it could be repaired. I don't know if I can do this, Peter, she whispered. I want to be there for you, but it feels like everything we had is slipping away. Peter's eyes were filled with regret, his voice soft. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to deal with any of this. But I need you now more than ever. Claire swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She didn't know if she had the strength to help him through this journey, knowing it could change everything between them. But she also knew that walking away wasn't something she was ready for either. In the days that followed, Claire and Peter began to tread carefully around each other. The air in their home was thick with unspoken words and unresolved tension. They attended therapy together at Peter's suggestion, and while it helped them begin to unravel the complexity of Peter's hidden past, it didn't erase the growing distance between them. Each session brought Peter closer to understanding his identity, the parts of his childhood that he had long suppressed. But for Claire, each revelation only deepened the uncertainty she felt about their future. She watched him change, slowly, subtly, and with every step forward he took, she felt herself drifting further away. One evening, after a particularly quiet therapy session, they sat together at the kitchen table, the weight of their journey hanging in the silence. Peter spoke first, his voice tired but sincere. I don't know if I'll ever have all the answers, but I know I don't want to lose you in the process. Claire looked at him, her heart aching. I don't know what our future looks like, Peter. I'm trying, but everything feels different now. Peter reached out and took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. It's different, yes, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe this is a chance for us to rebuild, stronger, more honest. Claire nodded, though deep down, she wasn't sure. The uncertainty of their future loomed large, and while Peter's words were hopeful, the reality was far more complicated. She wanted to believe they could rebuild, but the fear of what what he might become, kept her grounded in doubt. As they sat together, hands intertwined, they both knew one thing. Whatever lay ahead, it would not be easy. But for now, they were still trying. If you like this story, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your suggestions and ideas for future stories. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when new love story with a twist is released.